During Christmas dinner, under the warm lights and fake laughter, the father stared straight at his son and coldly said, "You're nothing but a burden. Get out of my house." No one defended him. No one stopped him. But then he stood up and made that man pay in a way no one in the family ever saw coming. You're wondering, who was that boy? And what happened next? Stick with us. This shocking story is just getting started. The whole town knew Brian. Back then, every Friday night felt like church as people packed into the football field. The old wooden bleachers creaked under the weight of fans dressed in red and white, holding up signs with his name, chanting, "Let's go, Brian!" Like he wasn't just a high school kid, but their last shot at glory. He ran like the wind, hit like a hammer. One twist, one pivot, a perfect throw, and the crowd would erupt. Every time Brian scored, his dad, Carl, would throw both hands in the air, shouting so loud even the rowdy students nearby would fall silent. Carl was a retired high school football coach. Tough, quiet, and firmly believed a man's worth was measured by wins. His whole life he taught boys how to rally when they were down, how to get up when they got knocked flat. But Brian didn't need much coaching. He was born to play. In his senior year, Brian landed a full-ride scholarship to Texas State. They promised to train him for the pros. The night the offer came, Carl cracked open a beer, patted his son on the back 3 times, eyes slightly glassy. For him, that was a full-on emotional outburst. Then came the fateful playoff game on a cold November night. Brian took the field wearing a dark red wristband, his lucky charm, hand-stitched by his mom back in 6th grade. Second half, the other team closed in, tension tight as wire. Brian had the ball, twisted to slip between 2 defenders, when a 250-pound lineman came barreling in from behind and drove his head straight into the ground. That sound, helmet hitting turf, was colder than the night wind. The crowd went dead silent. For the first few seconds, Brian didn't move. When the medical team rushed in, he was mumbling fragments of words, eyes darting, body twitching slightly. They rushed him to the hospital that same night. Diagnosis: severe concussion, possibly affecting memory and emotional regulation. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. But they should also be prepared. Brian might never play football again. 3 days later, the university emailed to say his athletic scholarship was temporarily suspended. A week after that, a withdrawal notice arrived in the mail. That was it. No follow-up, no check-ins, not a single call from the recruitment coach. Brian lay still on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, saying nothing. His mother, Laura, sat beside him, holding his hand like if she let go, he might drift off somewhere and never come back. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just silence, so long it started to scare people. The same kid, who once lit up stadiums, now couldn't bring himself to say a word. Laura tried to keep the household afloat, cleaning, cooking, lighting candles, playing soft music, but the air in the house was thick like fog. A week later, Brian packed up his dorm and officially left college. He didn't take much: a few workout clothes, some textbooks, a small framed photo of the team, and a faded cap with the old team logo. His mom drove him home. It took over 3 hours. No one spoke. The radio played a few old country songs, but no one was really listening. As the car turned onto Maple, the oak-lined street leading to their old neighborhood, Brian leaned his head against the window, staring at the white fence like he was seeing it for the first time. The pale, yellow, 2-story house still looked the same, except no one was standing at the door to welcome him home. Carl stood on the front step, arms crossed. He looked at his son for a few seconds, then said exactly one sentence: "Go on in. Room upstairs is the same." Brian's mom got out first, walked around the car, and pulled him into a hug. It was soft and firm at the same time, like she didn't want to hurt him, but also couldn't let him slip away. Brian didn't hug back, but he didn't pull away either. His dad stayed put, didn't step forward, didn't ask a thing, just gave a quick nod, then turned back into the house, leaving the door open like that was enough. And in that moment, standing in the damp front yard, with the yellow light spilling out from the living room, Brian realized some things don't have to be said out loud to make you feel completely cold inside. The next morning, before Brian's alarm could go off, a pounding knock hit the door like a hammer. 6 o'clock. Backyard. 3 minutes. Carl's voice was dry and sharp. He didn't wait for a response. Just walked off. Brian opened his eyes, head still heavy like it was weighed down with stone. He rolled out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor, eyes hazy, but still got dressed like a machine. In the backyard, Carl was already waiting, jump rope in hand, 2 small weights set out, and a wooden board with the workout written in bold letters. A body that's not used will rot. If you want to live here, you work like a man. He didn't care whether Brian heard him or not. Every morning from 6 to nearly 8, Brian had to jump rope, do push-ups, clean the garage, mow the lawn, and clear out the back shed. In the winter, the air was thick with fog, his hands numb from the cold, his head spinning. More than once, Brian collapsed in the middle of the yard, hands clutching his head, eyes shut tight, trying to breathe through it. But Carl just stood there, arms crossed, watching like it was some kind of fitness test. "You're not weak. You just want people to think you are so they'll pity you," he said. Like he could read straight into Brian's mind. Brian didn't know how to answer. Sometimes he even asked himself, am I actually weak or just making excuses? But no one ever told him that post-concussion brain injuries can scramble your memory, mess with your emotions, throw your behavior off balance. They just said mild concussion. No one told him that mild can still ruin you if it goes untreated. Some days Brian would walk into the kitchen to make orange juice, but the moment he opened the fridge, he'd forget why he was even there. One time, he left the oven on for 3 hours, burning the tray of cookies his mom had made. Another day, in the middle of a meal, he just dropped his spoon, got up, walked into the yard, and sat under a tree for nearly an hour, with no idea why. But Carl didn't see symptoms. To him, it was laziness, lack of discipline. One hit and you fall apart? Pathetic. I thought I raised someone tough. Laura stepped between them more than once, gently saying, "Carl, he's not okay. We should take him in, get him checked again." But Carl just scoffed. Checked for what? So some doctor can slap a label on him and let him play victim the rest of his life? One afternoon, Katie, Brian's ex, showed up. She brought a small paper bag with her. Inside was an old scarf Brian had left behind. "I heard from your mom you were back. I just wanted to see if you were okay." Brian smiled, a twisted, broken kind of smile, like he was trying to lift both sides of his face but forgot how. They sat in the backyard. It was cold, but sunlight fell gently across the grass. "I don't remember what you said when you left the hospital," Brian said. "I just said I needed time. I didn't know how things would turn out." "Yeah, I still don't know how I turned out." Katie looked at him, her eyes a little wet. "Are you going back to school?" "No. They pulled the scholarship. I've got no reason to be there anymore." Silence. Then suddenly Brian turned to her, voice sharp, cracking without control. "You think I'm faking it, don't you? Everyone does. You too." Katie flinched. "No, I don't. You're scared of being tied to someone with no future. I get it. You don't have to fake being kind." The cold air suddenly turned to ice. Katie stood up, placed the paper bag on the table. "I hope you find peace." She walked away without looking back. Brian sank down, face buried in his hands. He didn't know why he'd reacted like that. Everything had come out like someone else was pulling the strings. And when it was over, all that remained was a huge, hollow emptiness. The next morning, Carl found out. He didn't need the full story. He just threw out a line over breakfast. "If my son's so weak he can't even hold on to a girlfriend, might as well stop wasting food and quit living." Laura dropped her spoon. Brian stayed silent, staring at his plate of cold eggs, fingers gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. In the days that followed, Carl didn't let up. "I worked 40 years straight, and now I'm stuck feeding a grown man who doesn't leave his room." You used to be a star, and now, just a shadow. Real men aren't afraid to fail. But you didn't fail, you quit. To Brian, it sounded like rain, not loud, just constant, seeping into every crack inside him. That night, he locked his bedroom door and sat at his old desk. In front of him was a job application from the local supermarket, stockroom position. He was ready to fill it out. He truly wanted to do something, anything. But when he got to the line for full name, his hand started shaking. The letters came out crooked, some too dark, some barely visible. He erased and tried again. Spelling mistake. He crumpled the page, grabbed a new one. Again and again. Nearly 10 sheets ended up on the floor. With every mistake, His heart pounded harder, his face flushed, and his hand trembled more. He knew something wasn't right, but he had no idea what to do about it. On the last sheet, he put pen to paper, wrote a few words, then froze mid-sentence. His eyes locked on the half-finished line, hands still gripping the pen like stone. And outside that silent room, the TV kept playing in the living room. Another sports report featuring young men still chasing the dream Brian had already fallen out of. Brian never sent that job application. It stayed on his desk, folded in half, the edge slightly wrinkled from sweaty hands. But a few days later, he tried again. This time, a different kind of form. An application to be an assistant coach for his old high school football team. He figured if he couldn't play anymore, maybe he could still stand on the sidelines, teach, pass on what he once had. At the very least, he still understood the game better than most people out there. A week later, the school called back with their answer. It wasn't about qualifications. It wasn't about availability. They just said it softly, but the words cut deep. "We're really sorry, Brian. The board is concerned there might be psychological risks if you haven't fully recovered." He thanked them, set the phone down, and didn't say a word for the rest of the night. That night was another typical dinner at Carl's house. Not a meal for nourishment, but a quiet battleground where everyone's place at the table was constantly measured. "Jordan just signed with the Denver Broncos," Carl said while slicing meat. 3 years, almost $3 million. That kid's always known what really matters. Brian picked at his vegetables, eyes down. "Back in the day, I thought Brian would be the first in our family to make it to the NFL," Carl added, glancing over quickly. "But, well," the sentence hung there like a hook in the air, unfinished but sharp enough to land deep. Laura gave a strained smile, tried to shift the topic to the weather, then asked Brian if he wanted apple pie for dessert. He shook his head. After dinner, Carl headed to the living room, where he usually sat with a beer in hand, eyes glued to whatever game was on TV. Lining the wall from the staircase to the hallway were dozens of framed photos. Brian in red and white, Brian holding trophies, Brian midair in that legendary throw. Every frame spotless, perfectly aligned. Every time Brian walked past them, he felt like he couldn't breathe. Not because of nostalgia, but because it felt like being forced to live alongside a version of himself he could never get back to. A version his father clearly worshipped more than the son still sitting at the dinner table. One photo stood apart in the corner of the living room. Brian and Carl on the field together, shaking hands after a big win. That photo used to make Brian proud. Now, he could barely look at it. A few times, Brian thought about taking the photos down, but then he'd stop himself. What would it change? They were the only proof his father had that he was ever worth something. Laura still tried to keep the peace, but Brian noticed she spoke less and less. Some nights, she'd only say 3 things the whole meal. Ask who wanted seconds, remind everyone to drink water, and quietly clear the table. One evening, while helping her wash dishes, Brian blurted out, "If I left this place, the house would probably feel lighter." She looked at him, not surprised, just let out a soft breath and said, "Brian, I know you're trying, but your father, he doesn't know how to handle weakness." "He sees weakness in anything that doesn't fit what he wants," Brian replied. She didn't argue. After that, Brian barely spoke to Carl. They lived under the same roof, ate at the same table, but didn't really interact. Every exchange was either a one-sided remark from his father or silence from him. Brian started spending more time in the shed out back. One day, rummaging through an old dusty wooden box, he found a beat-up black G-Shock. Rubber strap, scratched face, long dead battery. It was his 15th birthday gift. Carl had given it to him during one of the rare times they ever went out to eat alone. "A watch is for someone who's on time and has a goal," Carl had said. The battery was long gone. The strap was loose. But Brian had kept it for years as a quiet reminder of something that once felt like a bond. Now he decided to fix it, clean the face, replace the strap, put in a new battery, and if all went well, he'd give it back to Carl on Christmas night. Not to make amends, not to ask for forgiveness, just to say, "I still remember." Fixing the watch wasn't easy. Brian's vision would blur without warning, and his hands shook when doing anything delicate. Some days, he'd remove a screw and forget where he put it. Other times, he'd install the strap wrong and have to start over. But he didn't quit. Every day he sat at the old wooden table in the shed, under the weak yellow glow of a desk lamp, working on the watch. The tiny clicks of metal pieces, the soft clatter of falling screws, it was the only sound that made him feel like he still had control over something. After nearly 2 weeks, the watch lit up. The new battery kicked in. The strap held firm. He stared at the screen, hour, date, seconds, then sat back, still for a moment. The second hand ticked. 1, 2, 3. Brian leaned into the chair, eyes fixed on the watch face, and murmured quietly to himself, "At least, this is something I can fix." Brian placed the watch in a small box, wrapped it in plain brown paper, and tied it with a simple red string. No card, no note. The gift didn't need an explanation. It was there, proof that he still remembered what mattered, even if no one seemed to remember him anymore. On Christmas night, the house looked just like it did every year. Warm lights curled around the stair railings. The tree stood in the corner of the living room, surrounded by shiny gift boxes with red, green, and white bows. Soft jazz Christmas music played from a Bluetooth speaker on the mantel. The smell of roast meat mixed with cinnamon and vanilla from fresh-baked cookies filled the air. Laura moved through the kitchen, busy as always, keeping the tradition alive, as if the right recipes might help people forget the mess that still lived under this roof. There weren't many guests, a few close relatives, an uncle, an aunt, and Jordan, Brian's cousin, who showed up with his new girlfriend. He'd just signed his NFL contract. Everyone knew the night would orbit around that. "Look at him," Carl said loudly as Jordan walked in, shaking hands and smiling wide. Just last year, he was that clumsy kid trailing behind Brian. Now he's in the NFL. Who would have thought, huh? Brian sat at the end of the table, 2 seats away from Carl. He wore a gray button-down with frayed cuffs. His hair was neatly cut, his face clean-shaven, but his eyes were dull, sunken from too many sleepless nights. Everyone raised their glasses to toast Jordan. His new girlfriend beamed beside him. Carl threw an arm around his shoulders like he was proudly introducing his own son. A real contract, not a maybe. It's happening. NFL folks. Denver Broncos. This family's got something to be proud of again. No one mentioned Brian. No one asked how he'd been, what he was planning, if he was feeling any better. Laura glanced over a few times as if she wanted to say something, but then she'd go back to pouring wine, bringing out new dishes. Her eyes looked tired, her movements slow, like she was going through the motions out of habit, not joy. Brian barely touched his food. The mashed potatoes on his plate grew cold, the gravy congealed. He quietly sipped water, his hand brushing against the inside pocket of his coat, where the gift box was tucked. After a while, he stood up, pulled the box from his coat, and walked toward Carl. Everyone else kept laughing, still caught up in their own stories. "I have something for you," Brian said, voice low and steady. Carl looked at him, wine glass in hand, a half smile still frozen on his face. Brian held out the wrapped box. Carl stared at it for a moment. Didn't reach for it, just raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Just something old. But I think you'll remember it." The room quieted just a little. Brian still held the gift out. Carl lifted his glass, finished it in one go, and set it down on the table. "What do you think I need from you?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. "Final." Brian didn't answer. People started to turn and look. Jordan whispered something to his girlfriend, who blinked, clearly uncomfortable. Carl turned fully toward him now, no attempt to hide the contempt on his face. "You're a burden. Get out of my house." The words dropped like a blade, slicing through the air. No one said a word. No one stood up. No one defended him. Laura stood by the oven, holding a tray of cookies. She froze in place, her eyes wide, but her face blank. She looked down at the floor, as if hoping it would open up and swallow her whole. Brian stood there, still holding the box. He looked at his father for a moment. His face gave nothing away. He didn't speak. Then he turned, walked back to the dining table, and gently set the gift down beside Carl's half-finished glass of wine. No sound, no drama, just quiet. No one knew how he'd fix that watch. No one asked how many days it took to make that one small thing work again. No one cared, because to them, the gift didn't matter, only who it came from. He grabbed his coat, slipped it on, and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. No one said goodbye. The Christmas music kept playing, but now it sounded like a cruel joke. Laura watched him go, her eyes rimmed red, but she didn't move. As if caught between motherly instinct and the fear of her husband's judgment, she stayed frozen in place. He opened the door. Cold wind rushed in. Outside there was no snow yet, but the sky looked silvered over, thin, cold, and still. He stepped off the porch, shoes crunching into the frost-hardened grass. The door shut behind him. No voice called out, no footsteps followed. Only the wind whistling through bare branches. He kept walking, never looking back. His heart wasn't racing, his hands didn't shake, his chest didn't feel heavy anymore. It was empty, but sometimes emptiness feels a lot like relief. The wind slipped down his collar sharp as a razor blade, but he didn't pull it closed. No matter how cold it got, there was nothing left inside him that could freeze. Brian left that house that night carrying nothing but his wallet and car keys. No one asked where he was going, and he didn't know either. In the end, the old car became the only roof he had left in a world gone cold. Brian's old 2008 Ford sat parked in the lot of a Walmart, about a 10-minute walk from downtown. The back seats were folded down, layered with thin blankets and a crumpled sleeping bag. A backpack with some clothes, a paper bag holding a few canned goods, a half-used water bottle, and a line of sticky notes across the dashboard. That was everything he had. At night, the temperature dropped hard. Wind slipped through the window seals, forcing him to wear both his coat and a scarf inside the sleeping bag. He'd wake up multiple times, from the cold, or from sudden noises outside. A truck pulling in too close, people arguing nearby, alarms blaring in the distance. The real pain wasn't the cold. It wasn't hunger or exhaustion. It was the long stretches of silence, the kind that left nothing to distract him from his own thoughts. He used to be the town's pride. He used to get a pat on the back from his dad in front of packed stadiums. Now he avoided eye contact with the security guard while brushing his teeth in a public restroom, wiped his face with paper towels, tried not to look at himself in the mirror. During the day, Brian wandered through the nearby neighborhoods. A few times he tried applying for jobs, warehouse work, waiting tables, but it never went past the first step. The moment people saw "dropped out" or "history of brain injury" on his form, their eyes shifted. The conversation was already over. One morning, while sitting on the curb eating a cold piece of bread, someone called his name. "Brian?" He looked up. A man around his age stood there, knit cap, glasses. "You don't remember me?" "Josh, we had gym together in high school." Brian nodded slowly, not because he remembered, but because he didn't want to make it awkward. Josh worked for a nonprofit called Harmony Movement. They ran physical activity programs for kids with autism. They were short-staffed, and Josh remembered how good Brian had been with the younger kids back in school. "These kids don't need a great coach," Josh said, handing him a slip of paper with an address on it. "They just need someone who won't give up on them." The next Monday morning, Brian showed up at the center. It was a small, pale blue building tucked next to an abandoned basketball court. Inside were 3 training rooms with rubber floor mats, a few pieces of play equipment, resistance bands, rubber balls, and a row of simple lockers. On his first day, he stood in the corner, just watching. There were about 7 kids, ages 6 to 12. One kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Another screamed anytime someone got too close. One just ran in circles the entire time. Brian couldn't make sense of what was happening. He had no idea where to begin. Josh came over and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "It's okay. Just stay here. Sit with them, so they know you're not going to disappear." A few weeks in, a little girl named Lila started handing Brian foam balls every morning, placing them in his hands without a word. A boy named Aaron gave a small nod when Brian showed him how to breathe after a fall. Slowly, the kids began remembering his name. One even scribbled a shaky drawing of him smiling and slipped it into his coat pocket without him noticing. No one asked who he used to be. No one mentioned the NFL or college. To them, he was just Coach B, the guy who showed up on time and never yelled when they got something wrong. Brian began to feel the pace of life slow down. He stopped snapping without reason. When he felt himself start to tighten inside, he'd sit down and count his breaths, just like Josh had taught him. He wrote his daily tasks on sticky notes. Get to the center by 8:30. Breathing practice with Max. Lunch. Check in with Josh. Sticky notes lined the dashboard of Brian's car. Each time he finished a task, he crossed it off with a red pen. Those red lines felt like motion, slow, maybe, but steady. Still moving forward. He started remembering the streets. No more GPS to get to the center. He remembered the kids' names, the tiny habits that made them who they were, who liked soft balls, who flinched at whistles, who needed 3 taps on the shoulder before they could start an activity. One morning, light rain tapped against the windows, so the group moved indoors to the padded room. Brian was helping Lila practice stepping over colored foam tiles. At first, she froze, feet planted, mumbling, "Can't, can't." Brian didn't push. He sat down beside her and demonstrated with his hand, jumping step by step. "We don't have to jump high," he said gently. "We just need to jump far enough to get past the first one." Lila looked at him. Wide eyes, lips pressed tight. Then slowly she lifted one foot, stepped over the first tile, then the second, then the third. When Lila reached the last tile, she looked up at Brian, then suddenly lunged forward and hugged him from the front. Not hard, not long, but enough for Brian to feel a small tremor run down his spine. He didn't know what to do at first, so he simply placed a hand on her shoulder and gently returned the hug. No one clapped. No one said a word. But in that moment, Brian felt something he hadn't felt in years. He mattered. 1 year after Lila's quiet, unexpected hug, Brian was still working at the Harmony Movement Center. 3 days a week, he led 2 groups of kids. The names that once blurred together were now etched into memory. Max needed 3 taps before he could start. Lila still hated whistles, then didn't like eye contact while talking. Brian remembered all of it. He also remembered where every piece of equipment went, when to turn on the music, and when silence worked better. Josh had started letting him design full workout sessions on his own. "You're doing better than you think," he said, when Brian hesitated to accept the responsibility. That June, the organization decided to make a short video to thank supporters. Josh suggested telling Brian's story. At first, Brian refused. He didn't think there was anything worth telling. But Josh just said, "We're not making this to show off. We're making it so people like you know they're changing the world." The shoot was simple. 1 camera, a few shots of Brian guiding the kids, a few quiet words about his journey since the injury. No script, no staging. Just soft golden light and the sound of laughter echoing through the padded gym. The video was shown at a community event at the end of summer. Someone filmed it and uploaded it to social media. Within a week, it passed 200,000 views. Local news outlets picked it up, calling Brian a quiet hero. Old classmates commented, "Can't believe Brian's still fighting." His former PE teacher shared the video with the caption, "Proud of you, number 27. His name resurfaced, not for football, but for the fact that he didn't give up. One morning in early October, while Brian was jotting notes on the steering wheel, a familiar figure appeared in front of the car. Laura. Her hair was grayer, her frame thinner. She didn't walk up right away, just stood still for a few seconds, eyes wet. Brian rolled down the window. They looked at each other. No one asked, "How did you know where to find me?" Maybe she'd always known. "Your father, he's sick, lung cancer, stage 4, she said softly. "He hasn't said it out loud, but I know he wants to see you." Brian stayed silent. She didn't beg, didn't offer some last-minute plea for forgiveness. She just handed him a small piece of paper with a hospital address written on it, stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. That afternoon, Brian went to the hospital. No call ahead, no bag in hand. Just a quiet walk from the bus stop to the white brick building thick with the smell of antiseptic. The room was on the 4th floor. A small sign on the door read, "Carl Bennett." He paused, didn't go in right away. Through the slightly open door, he saw Carl lying on his side, spine curved, so thin the bones in his neck pushed visibly beneath loose skin. In Carl's hand was a photograph, Brian in his high school uniform, mid-shout after a touchdown. His fingers clutched the edge of the photo like he was afraid someone might take it away. Brian stood there, unmoving, no anger, no warmth. Just a kind of still emptiness, the kind that comes when a machine finally shuts down after running too long. He could have walked in, could have sat beside him, could have held that frail hand, waiting for a late apology. But he didn't need it anymore. He already had enough, from Lila, from Josh, from the sticky notes lined across his dashboard. From the hugs, the glances, the quiet kindness of kids who never judged him. And from himself, the man who still got up every morning on time, still remembered to breathe slowly, still counted his steps like it was day one. He didn't need applause, didn't need a microphone, didn't need a nod from anyone to know he was no longer a burden. Brian turned away. His steps didn't hesitate. The door clicked shut behind him without a sound. The sky outside the hospital was still gray. The wind pushed in steady waves, but he didn't hunch his shoulders. His collar stayed open, hands out of his pockets, eyes forward. Not everyone is born into the right family, but everyone has the right to choose where they belong. And Brian had made his choice. This time, he didn't need anyone's permission. Some wounds don't bleed, but they last a lifetime, especially when they come from the place that was supposed to feel like home. Brian didn't need a father who came around. He didn't need a last-minute hug. He didn't need a crowd's applause to know he was worth something. What he needed, and finally gave himself, was kindness, purpose, a place no one could push him out of again. Because sometimes, growing up isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about being strong enough to let go at the right time and steady enough to start over from the very bottom. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up on your own when no one else was there? Have you ever forgiven, not because they deserved it, but because you needed to move forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story hit something real for you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Real stories, raw stories, stories that need to be heard.